Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something incredibly complex, and honestly, a situation that doesn't get nearly enough attention. We're looking at the 2026 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan for Myanmar. The reality on the ground there has shifted drastically over the last few years, and we're going to break down the data, the changing strategies, and the very real human toll detailed in this report. So, let's get right into it.
16.2 million. Let that number sink in for a second. We're talking about nearly one-third of Myanmar's entire population currently needing some form of humanitarian assistance. Whenever you look at a national crisis and see a full third of the country requiring a literal lifeline, it's just a staggering metric. It shows us an environment where the absolute basic pillars of daily survival have just fractured. And when we break down that 16.2 million, the reality becomes even starker. We aren't just talking about abstract numbers or combatants here. 31% are children and 12% are the elderly. That means nearly half of everyone needing aid are historically the most vulnerable people in any society. Looking at it this way really humanizes the massive scale of this emergency.
Part 1. A deepening humanitarian crisis.
So, to understand how things got to this point, we have to look at the macro drivers. The crisis has deepened because of this brutal compounding trifecta: intensifying armed conflict, recurrent natural disasters, and a collapsing economy. It's pushed community resilience right to the edge. Now, you might notice the total number of people in need actually dropped slightly compared to 2025, but the report makes something absolutely clear. That doesn't mean things are improving. In 2025, the scope looked at the whole country. But for 2026, the team had to narrow their focus to just 227 specific townships. Those are the places, about two-thirds of the country, that were hit the hardest by recent shocks. The severity hasn't dropped, the lens has just become hyper-focused on the most critical zones.
Section 2. Drivers of the emergency. Well, what exactly is driving this unprecedented need? Essentially, we're looking at a devastating dual shock. First, you have escalating armed conflicts spreading across multiple regions. But then, compound that with a massive 7.7 magnitude earthquake that hit central Myanmar in March of 2025. You've got widespread infrastructure destruction from a major seismic event layered right on top of an already volatile conflict zone. It is literally a shock on top of a shock.
And this compounded instability has led to an estimated 3.6 million displaced people. And these aren't static situations either. The data shows that most folks displaced by conflict have been forced to flee multiple times. They're constantly on the move, searching for safety that just isn't there, and often ending up in makeshift shelters without the absolute basics.
Section 3. The severe human toll.
Okay, stepping away from the big macro statistics for a minute, let's look at the actual reality on the ground. A displaced woman in the Northwest shared this. "We thought displacement would last a month, but it has now been 2 years. We still live in a tent with hardly any income and are unable to afford proper health care." And that is the daily, lived experience for millions right now. What started as a temporary crisis has calcified into a permanent state of survival.
The physical needs here are just acute. 8.5 million people are staring down acute food insecurity. We're seeing this widespread drop in nutrition, especially in kids. And honestly, one of the most alarming details is the collapsing health infrastructure. The report documented 1,815 specific incidents of violence or threats against healthcare. And when the medical system breaks down, totally treatable illnesses suddenly become fatal. The plan also points out some highly specific vulnerabilities. A major one is the non-displaced, stateless populations. This is primarily the Rohingya, with about 550,000 remaining in Rakhine State. They're basically caught in the crossfire of this escalating conflict, but they also face severe systemic barriers to movement and documentation. So they're effectively trapped, making them highly dependent on humanitarian lifelines. Beyond the physical needs like food and medicine, there's this invisible toll: severe protection risks. When people run out of options, they're forced into devastating compromises. The report points to rising rates of forced labor, child recruitment by armed actors, early marriages, and the daily lethal threat of explosive ordnance basically scattered across the landscape.
Part 4. The 2026 Response Strategy.
So, with such a clear picture of the problem, how does the international community actually respond? Well, we're faced with a really hard strategic reality. While 16.2 million people need help, the 2026 plan is targeting 4.9 million. Why the massive gap? It all comes down to strict prioritization. The humanitarian country team is directing their limited resources to the people facing the absolute most severe, immediate life-threatening risks. It's triage, driven by pure necessity and limited resources. And where are those people located? Out of those 227 affected townships, 16 are currently classified at level 5. That is catastrophic severity. This goes beyond a tough situation. Catastrophic means a complete, across-the-board breakdown of essential services, where people are at immediate risk of widespread suffering and death. This is the absolute epicenter of the response. Within that targeted 4.9 million, they're focusing on 4 distinct groups. Internally displaced persons, or IDPs, are the largest chunk at 2.6 million. That's followed by 1.9 million other people directly hit by shocks like the earthquake, then 248,000 returned IDPs who are trying to rebuild, and finally, the 187,000 non-displaced, stateless people we talked about earlier.
The whole response is really built on 2 core pillars. Objective 1 is purely physical survival, saving lives, reducing mortality, getting food, water, and shelter out there fast. But Objective 2 recognizes that survival alone isn't enough. Protecting the safety, dignity, and basic human rights of these folks in such a volatile environment is just as crucial.
Finally, Section 5, Urgent Need for Funding. A strategy is really just a piece of paper if you don't have the resources to pull it off, right? $890 million, that's the baseline financial requirement for the 2026 plan. We aren't talking about long-term development or fixing the broader economy here. This is the bare minimum needed to deliver emergency, life-saving aid to those 4.9 million people who are completely out of options.
And it's really important to look at how the communities themselves actually want this aid delivered. Through feedback, they've been super clear about their priorities. Cash assistance is a huge preference. It offers flexibility and dignity. It lets a family decide, hey, our biggest need this week is medicine, not shelter, and adapt as this incredibly volatile situation shifts.
We also have to look at what just happened as a warning. The humanitarian coordinator was explicit. In 2025, severe underfunding meant millions of people were left without any aid at all. And when aid doesn't arrive, families can't just hit pause. They're forced into those harmful coping strategies we talked about: child labor, pulling kids from school, rationing whatever tiny bit of food they have left.
Which brings us to a final, really critical thought to leave you with today. With 16 townships at a catastrophic level, over 3 million people displaced, and the dual shocks of conflict and natural disaster constantly wearing down their survival mechanisms, what happens if the international community fails to mobilize these funds for 2026? Because the cost of inaction isn't just missing a financial target. It's measured directly in human lives and the collapse of entire communities. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a clearer picture of the vital realities on the ground.